Forrest Gump regularly appears on various lists of the best films in history. It has long been turned into memes and quotes, and the image of the main character is surely recognized even by those who have never seen the movie. Forrest Gump is loved and rewatched not only in America but all over the world. But how well do we really understand it? How does the film reinterpret American history? Why do some consider it problematic? What makes the main character interesting? And what is the trick of the movie's screenplay? Let's try to figure it out in this video essay. The action of Forrest Gump covers about 30 years. It begins in the mid-1950s and ends in the 1980s. Even with a superficial view, it is clear that Robert Zemeckis' film is a historical panorama of America in the second half of the 20th century, a virtual encyclopedia of American life, albeit somewhat schematic. It's difficult to say at first glance what Forrest Gump is primarily about. Is it about the Vietnam War and post-traumatic stress disorder? About the failure of a countercultural project? Perhaps about fate? Or tragic love? It seems like it's about everything at once. Forrest Gump, like Moby Dick or War and Peace, is an example of a total plot, a large-scale story in which the most diverse motives and themes can easily coexist, from domestic violence to divine intervention. The literary comparison here is not accidental. Zemeckis' film is one of those examples where the adaptation not only surpassed the original but also displaced it from the public memory. The main difference between the book and the film is in tone. While Winston Groom's novel with the same name was rather acidic satire on modern America, the adaptation, on the contrary, turned out to be a fairy tale for a wide range of viewers. In the mid-90s, when Forrest Gump hit the screens, America was preparing for a leap into the new millennium. It seemed that all the major upheavals were behind and the country was looking forward to a bright future. Therefore, the audience needed a clear and inspiring image that would give them optimism and inspire new achievements. Forrest Gump's story is inseparably linked to the history of the United States, and in some sense, Forrest is its symbol, a bridge between America's past and future. At the beginning of the film, we learn that Forrest is not only a native of Alabama, one of the most conservative states in the heart of the American South, but also a descendant of the founder of the Ku Klux Klan, Nathan Bedford Forrest. These are attributes of America's past, but as the narrative progresses, the protagonist constantly opens the door to the future, anticipating the boom of new technologies and, by chance, becoming a shareholder in a fruit company. He suggests the design of the smiley face. He even lends a hand to the Watergate scandal. The film strives to immerse the viewer in the era, and this is done not so much through costumes and decorations but through well-recognized music: Elvis Presley, Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan, and many others. Of course, they lose their musical self-sufficiency and become an instrument of narration. On the one hand, they clearly mark a particular historical period for the viewer, and on the other hand, they emotionally connect the viewer to the story. Although Forrest Gump is considered a fairly optimistic movie, it contains notes of historical pessimism. The film is based on a system of repetitions, with parallels often suggested by scenes, such as Forrest's son having the same name as his father. This is a neat reminder that history inevitably repeats itself, both in times of trouble and in times of victory. As the creators show, the lesson of World War II has still not been learned. And now, a new generation of Americans is forced to participate in a new war on another continent. Although the authors insisted on the apolitical nature of the film, many viewers saw Forrest Gump as a conservative manifesto, extolling Republican ideals, family, religious faith, and honest work. According to their opinion, the conservatism of the film is indicated by the fact that Forrest is portrayed as a hero of the Vietnam War, while its opponents are depicted as unattractive marginals. The film also clumsily depicts the AIDS epidemic, which according to the prevalent version, killed Jenny. Moreover, some critics believe that the film has not stood the test of time. The Forrest Gump conceived by Robert Zemeckis and screenwriter Eric Roth is impossible in America after 9/11. The film looks at the history of the United States with a smile, but in the new reality, this was inappropriate. The creators planned a sequel, but abandoned the idea precisely after the tragic events of 2001. The 21st century began for the American nation with a great catastrophe, and the country needed completely different heroes. The character of Forrest Gump is shown in the film not only as a bridge between the past and the future, but also as a peculiar mediator between different population groups who can provide America with a new unity. He finds a common language with people who are not like each other: Jenny, a participant in the countercultural movement; Bubba, a representative of an ethnic minority; and Lieutenant Dan, who embodies America's rifle and boot in one person. We should not forget about Forrest's mother, who represents the older generation, wise with life experience. Forrest Gump is an interesting character. Throughout the story, he himself hardly changes, but the people around him do. The most radical change is experienced by Lieutenant Dan, who, after being wounded in the war, thinks his life is over, but then Forrest appears again. The friendship that develops between them is a reversed version of Army brotherhood, constructive and untainted by militarism. The very first thing we learn about the main character is that he has a low IQ and cannot attend a regular school. However, as the plot unfolds, Forrest displays a remarkable insight and great tenderness towards people. He overcomes social barriers and selflessly helps everyone in need. During the viewing, it seems as though Forrest is a robot who simply does what he is told. But thanks to Tom Hanks' virtuoso performance, the character gains unexpected dramatic depth. Forrest Gump is a genre-bending film that accommodates both coming-of-age and poignant melodrama, as well as war epic. Therefore, Tom Hanks had to play across different genres, switching between seemingly distant registers: a comic character, a war hero, a stranger who surprises with his wisdom, and a caring father. And the actor sometimes switched between very different genres and moods within a single shooting day. It's no wonder that the actor won his second consecutive Oscar for the role of Forrest Gump. In the creator's view, Forrest is a common man, someone you can rely on, and an exemplary citizen of the future. American cinema constantly shows stories of people willing to trample over others on the way to their goals, but Forrest is naively kind to those around him and accepts any job as a matter of course, while effortlessly achieving everything a typical careerist dreams of: winning an international tournament, nationwide fame, commercial success. And even the coincidences that work in the hero's favor do not seem like simple luck. Here, Zemeckis' film reproduces the Protestant work ethic underlying capitalism in its own way. It is as if the film is saying to the audience, be kind, follow the rules, work hard, enjoy the process, and luck will be on your side. Forrest is not naturally gifted intellectually; he mechanically performs routine tasks and rarely solves problems creatively. But according to the filmmaker's idea, it is precisely in this persevering, focused repetition of simple actions and lack of excessive reflection, rather than in innate abilities, that the secret of success lies. The success of Forrest Gump is largely thanks to screenwriter Eric Roth. The film structure is framed as a story within a story, allowing us to see events through the eyes of the protagonist. Forrest tells his life story to random people who sit next to him at a bus stop. However, few people pay attention to one clever trick by the screenwriter. In reality, the movie only begins at the end of the second hour, 15 minutes before the end, when Forrest jumps off the bench and runs to Jenny. Prior to that, the characters only share an extremely detailed backstory, which in another movie would only constitute the first act structurally. But more importantly, Roth managed to turn the caustic literary original into a moving story that each viewer can relate to in their own way. Another component of the movie's success is Robert Zemeckis' economic directing. He is one of those filmmakers whose visual language serves the story being told. Form rarely prevails over content for him. Like his friend and colleague Steven Spielberg, Zemeckis often prefers in-frame editing, which means that the narrative is conveyed not through conventional cuts, but through seamless changes behind the scenes or camera position. Take a look at this shot. The ping-pong table is already in the frame, but the composition is dominated by Forrest and the TV. The camera makes a smooth approach to the main character, and the ping-pong player is off-screen. Until Forrest pays attention to him and now the protagonist himself takes up the racket, the composition is completed. Such long shots are not typical for contemporary mainstream cinema and look rather pretentious, but for directors who continue the tradition of classic Hollywood cinema, including Zemeckis, such an example allows them to convey maximum information in minimum time without irritating the audience with frequent cuts. Similarly, the opening shot of the film is resolved, which performs several important tasks at once. It shows the scale of the mood and one of the central motifs: life as an unpredictable flight. In addition, the beginning also introduces us to the main character, and this acquaintance begins with shoes, a dirty sneaker contrasting with a clean and neat suit. Those who have seen the film know that these sneakers have a story, and Forrest's story is impossible without paying attention to his feet. By the way, from the point of view of a detached, almost heavenly observer, we will look at Forrest again, emphasizing the disproportion of his story with that of the country. The film's editing is subtle and not marked by flashy formal solutions. It mainly helps to move the story forward or change the narrative tone, as in this fragment that begins with a calm walk where the creators shift to dynamic editing only when we see the battle. Another important feature of the film is the use of visual effects, also recognized by the American Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Zemeckis has been enthusiastic about using technological innovations in film throughout his career, but here, unlike in later works like Polar Express or Beowulf, they do not overshadow the story but instead help to tell it. Tom Hanks' character is integrated into the chronicle with real historical figures as if he were a direct participant in the events, allowing Forrest Gump to transcend realism and signify his own fable-like quality. Historical chronicles and television, in general, play an important role in the narrative. Different characters and plot levels, historical and fictional, are connected through television, and sometimes Zemeckis' direction does not even migrate to the language of television. For example, Forrest's marathon sometimes looks like we are watching not a feature film, but an advertisement for sneakers. In 1995, Forrest Gump won 6 Oscars, including the major categories, beating such titans as The Shawshank Redemption and Pulp Fiction. Skeptics may have considered it a compromise decision and predicted that the film would quickly be forgotten, but history proved otherwise. Forrest Gump remains one of the major audience favorites, and its purely American theme is not an obstacle. Experience has shown that the film works great as a myth, understandable in all corners of the world. The story of a boy with health problems and a low IQ who becomes a war veteran, a ping-pong champion, and a successful entrepreneur who made a career out of shrimp is contagiously optimistic. While people around Forrest struggled with fears and doubts, while wars began and ended, presidents changed, he, despite everything, did his job honestly, took care of his loved ones, and never lost hope for the future. Perhaps that is the therapeutic power of the film, which makes us return to it again and again. After all, as we all know, life is like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're gonna get.